welcome to another adventure in Australian literature. This week we're doing something a little bit different because Monday is November 11th, and November 11th is famous for three different things, at least in my country it is. In 1880, a man was hanged. In 1918, a war ended, and in 1975, a government was dismissed. We're going to be talking about one of these events. But first, remember, if you would like to support us, we have our shop where we have books and writing services. We also, between October and December every year, we are open for submissions. So if you're interested in that, come across to our website. There's a tag with submissions, a whole page that tells you everything you need to know. There is also our Redbubble shop with lots and lots of designs. There's over 100 different designs if you would like to get something there. Christmas is coming up after all. They're available on a wide range of products. If you don't want to spend any money, that is absolutely fine. I fully understand that. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. Those things really help us get out there and spread what we're doing. So, a man hanged, a war ended, and a government dismissed. Which one are we talking about? Well, last year we talked about the war that ended when we did All Quiet on the Western Front. We're not going with the government that was dismissed. We're going with the man who was hanged. Because that's the first one. And it's actually the one that is, in terms of literature and culture and things to talk about, so much more interesting than either of the other two. So we are talking about Ned Kelly. Ned Kelly, who was hanged in Victoria on November 11th, 1880 for the murder of a police officer. So, we need to ask a question. Why is Ned Kelly so important? Why is he? Because Ned Kelly, I only need to say the words Ned Kelly and it will conjure up multiple images in every Australian's mind. He is a figure who is divisive, who is fascinating, and I would argue, because of where he comes in Australian history, is part of the reason why he is so significant. Now, we are going to be talking about books. But we're also going to be talking much wider in terms of Australian cultural world. So, Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly was born in Victoria, in northeastern Victoria, I believe. Yes, up near the New South Wales border, because they cross into New South Wales quite a lot. He was the son of an Irish convict and a woman of Irish descent who was involved whose family were involved in cattle stealing. Okay. He was one of many children, I believe about 6 or 7. And from a very young age, he, like the rest of his family, became involved with the police. There is a lot of connection between the Kellys and the cops. So Ned Kelly lost his father when he was about 12, and he was first imprisoned at 15 on suspicion of stealing a horse. Now, Ned Kelly has quite the persecution complex. Quite the persecution complex. That's not to say that there weren't things that he was being persecuted for, but he does have a tendency to exaggerate his innocence quite a bit. Methinks the lady doth protest too much, quite a bit in Ned Kelly's case. But Ned Kelly is a very famous outlaw. He was engaged in, like a lot of his family and friends, engaged in cattle and horse stealing and repurposing those, changing brands and reselling. They were not involved in, nice, respectable activities and persecuted unjustly. You want that story? You want Ben Hall. You want Ben Hall if you want that story. He absolutely had a good reason to be feeling persecuted and have reason to turn bushranger. But Ned Kelly is more famous. He is the most famous bushranger that we have. He's also the last bushranger that we have. So Ned Kelly held up banks, he stole horses, he stole cattle, he and his gang, and he killed policemen. The big last stand of Ned Kelly is at Glenrowan, where they took a pub full of people hostage. They took a whole load of people hostage, men, women, children, and attempted to derail the train with the cops. And there was a very large shootout, which killed men, women, and children. Innocent men, women, and children were killed because Ned Kelly took them hostage. The Victoria Police are not blameless here. They shot up the place. They shot up the place without regard to the fact that there were large numbers of hostages in the Glenrowan pub. But those people were there because Ned Kelly put them there. Okay? Do not think this guy is some sort of... The real Ned Kelly is not some sort of amazing Robin Hood folk hero. He put innocent people in danger. He got innocent people killed. Okay? The more I found out about Ned Kelly, the less I liked him. The man himself was unpleasant. I can only imagine how terrifying it must have been to be a hostage of Ned Kelly and the Kelly gang. He held hostages, he harangued them with all his complaints and his great narratives of persecution, and he put people in real mortal danger. So, not a nice man. What makes him different? What makes him different is he's the last bushranger. The last one. Now, there are lots of bushrangers. This book here is all bushrangers. It's just alphabetically bushrangers. Okay, in the back, the bushrangers are arranged by... The index is arranged by state. So you have New South Wales. There are three pages on New South Wales, Norfolk Island, Queensland. There's only 2 Queenslanders. South Australia, 3. Tasmania, another one that has 2 pages, and Victoria has about a page and a bit. Most of the bushrangers are from New South Wales. Bushrangers are either settlers or convicts who went bush. There are lots of them. Just off the top of my head, there is Mad Dan Morgan, there is Captain Thunderbolt, there is Ben Hall, there is Ned Kelly. Okay? There are lots. Captain Moonlight is another one. There are lots of bushrangers. But Ned Kelly is the last bushranger. Ned Kelly also wore the armour. Ned Kelly wore the armour, and the police didn't know about the armour until Ned Kelly came out and fired on them wearing the armour. The armour did work psychologically to terrify them. They were really quite shocked and frightened by this 47, I'm not sure if it's pounds or kilos, this very heavy armor that he wore. It was not wearable. It was worn once. And like a lot of armor, it left his legs exposed, and that's where they shot him. They shot him in the legs and captured him. That's the other thing. They captured Ned Kelly. The rest of the Kelly gang died in the Glenrowan pub, but Ned Kelly was captured, Ned Kelly was put on trial, Ned Kelly was convicted, and Ned Kelly was hanged. And his conviction was not at all contested. He killed the police officer. He killed Lonergan. So Ned Kelly is the last in a long line of bushrangers. So why, apart from the armour and being the last, why is he famous? Why should he have and why should I, on a literary channel and talking about Australian culture, be talking about just this last killer? Because Ned Kelly means something more than just the last bushranger. He means something more than a last bushranger who happened to wear armour. Ned Kelly is an idea. Ned Kelly is really one of the first Australian memes. I'll explain this. But first, I think we need to have a look at one of the documents where Ned Kelly speaks to us directly. Because Ned Kelly was people were hugely interested in him. He had the largest bounty ever on his head. And his exploits were reported widely in the late 1870s up until 1880. His trial was a big deal. The whole of what was happening in northeast Victoria was a big deal. Ned Kelly isn't even in the gold fields. He's not robbing wealthy gold miners. This is nothing like some of the other bushrangers. He is a tin pot little cattle thief. Legitimately, he is a cattle thief and a horse thief. This is what he is, with a persecution complex. So why is this guy so big? Well, we have his own words. We have this, the Geraldry letter. This was written in the town of Geraldry, where he had taken cops hostage, and 2 members of the Kelly gang were shown around town by the absolutely terrified cops, one of whose pregnant wife and children they had hostage back at the station. So yeah, I'd say that was pretty darn terrifying. Showing a pair of the gang around pretending that they are in uniform, pretending that they are extra police. Okay, so he's writing that this is being written there. This is essentially what Ned Kelly had been haranguing people with every time he took them hostage. This letter, it was written up by Joe Byrne, who had a 5th grade education and therefore was the most learned of all of them. Okay. This thing is really, I read through this. It's really hard to read. It reads like an illiterate, ill-educated person going on a rant. Genuinely does. Various things that are said about Ned Kelly. No, he wasn't attempting to establish a republic. No, he was hardly fighting this Irish cause, although he seemed to feel that justified him in a lot of ways. But if he was fighting an Irish cause, why was he stealing the cattle of an Irish Catholic landowner? It's not really the Robin Hood myth. There's a lot of self-justification in Ned Kelly. The closer you look at him, the less appealing he appears. This is really, it is really, really interesting. It is a very, very important historical document, and it is integral to the writing of the two books that we're going to have a look at, which are Robert Drew's Our Sunshine, which was the basis of the Heath Ledger Ned Kelly film, and Peter Carey's The True History of the Kelly Gang. Both of these books are narrated by Kelly himself. Both of these books draw on the Giraldery letter. Both of these books do a very good imitation of Ned Kelly's voice. Both of these books are really good. I actually think the Robert Drew is better, but that's because I prefer Robert Drew's writing over Peter Carey. But I would say that this is probably the best book Peter Carey has written. I'm just not a big fan of Peter Carey. I find that his prose gets very, very samey, and I would say that this one is the best book he's written because it is so different, because he does a very, very good job of imitating the voice of Ned Kelly. Does a very, very good job of it. Those parts where Ned Kelly is incapable of narrating, like the siege at Glenrowan and the trial and execution, are dealt with by other voices in this. Now, this one does have a third-person narrator. This one uses Ned Kelly telling his story to the people in the Glenrowan pub. All his justifications, all his carry-on. This is very much Ned Kelly's story from Ned Kelly's perspective, but it does have an overarching narrator to be able to establish things that it is impossible for the voice of Ned Kelly to be narrating. He's hardly going to be narrating the siege of Glenrowan as the siege of Glenrowan is taking place. So this one does have a third-person narrator to shape the material, but the majority of this is in the voice of Ned Kelly. This one is really a lot more interesting in some respects. I found it easier to read because although you get a lot of Ned Kelly, it's not totally Ned Kelly, and you do get enough of a sense of an outside voice that I think you do need, especially when you get to something like the Siege of Glenrowan, which you need that outside voice that's neither cop nor crim. A more objective over voice, which you get in this. Now, this doesn't include the trial or the execution. This just ends with the Siege of Glenrowan and the capture of Ned Kelly, because that's the story that Robert Drew wished to tell. This one is ostensibly Ned Kelly telling his story in sections that he is telling over time, delivered in 13 packets, each packet having a title that says, this is what's in this was what it was written on, this is how many pages contained, because this is pretending to be a found document. This one is supposedly a found document that Ned Kelly is writing for his daughter. No such daughter exists. This is almost entirely in Ned Kelly's voice, and as a result, I did find that really... it got tough going. I don't like Ned Kelly as a person, as a character. There are plenty of people who are unpleasant characters who I have great fun with, but I just found Ned Kelly and his complaints and persecution complex really wearing on me as a reader. You may not find that, but myself, I found him really tiresome. But this is definitely Peter Carey's best work. It won the Booker Prize. I believe there is now a film of this. It's either a film or a miniseries, but it's fairly new. These are really good books if you want to start with Ned Kelly. But why This is the big question. Why is this one man the subject of 2 books, Australia's first feature film, in fact, believed to be the world's first feature film was made in 1906 in Australia, and it's Ned Kelly. Ned Kelly is the subject of the world's first feature film. It ran for about an hour. There are fragments that exist only. Those fragments that do exist are heavily, heavily damaged. But that is a story we, as a new country, 1906, decided to put to a new medium, film. There are numerous films. Mick Jagger has played Ned Kelly. Mick Jagger's mother is Australian. But he played Ned Kelly with a more, I would say, Anglo-Irish accent. It's sort of a funny voice that he uses. It's not an Australian one, not like my big, broad Australian accent. Even though it's educated, it's still a broad Australian accent. It doesn't sound like someone else. Heath Ledger has played Ned Kelly. Again, he played him with a funny accent, and there's a lot of Irish voices. And to be honest, the children of migrants don't speak in their parents' voices. That has historically been the case in Australia. Australians have spoken in their own voice. Australians who were born here have always spoken in their own voice. They did not adopt their parents' accents. It was a feature of the early colonies. So why Heath Ledger is playing Ned Kelly with an Irishish accent instead of his own Australian accent, I do not know. And why other characters have broad Irish accents when they really should have Australian accents, especially his mother. His mother was born here. I don't know. I would love to hear an Australian Kelly. I would actually love to hear an Australian Kelly, not someone playing games with voices. I'd say probably because the Heath Ledger one was had international money and they had a particular idea of what they wanted. But he's the subject of films. He's the subject of songs. There are numerous songs. Midnight Oil has a song about him. Slim Dusty has a song about him. I was looking through. Johnny Cash has done a song about Ned Kelly. Ned Kelly has become synonymous with outlaw the same way Jesse James has. Or Wyatt Earp. We don't actually have lawmen in Australia. We don't have the equivalent of Wyatt Earp, which probably tells you something about the nature of colonial policing. I'm not going to say any more about that. But there is a mythologizing around Ned Kelly. So books, films, and probably most importantly of all, paintings. Or in particular, Sidney Nolan's 1940s Ned Kelly series, of which my favourite is the one on the horseback facing away, and yet wearing the armour which he never rode on horseback wearing, facing away with an empty space in an empty landscape. It is the ultimate meme. It is a perfect embodiment of what Ned Kelly as a concept is. Ned Kelly is empty and nebulous, and you can fill it with whatever you want. So, again, why is Ned Kelly this to Australia? What was it about this particular bushranger executed in 1880 which caused Australia to go, yes, that is the icon for us? Why? Well, to understand that, you actually need to understand a little bit about what was happening culturally in the 1880s and 1890s in Australia. Partly by the 1880s, Ned Kelly and Bushrangers were an anachronism. The convict period had ended 30 years beforehand. Transportation had ended at least 30 years earlier. That was the end of the convict transportation. Australia was an increasingly urbanised country, or not Australia, the colonies. The colonies that now make up Australia, the states of Australia, were increasingly an urban population. The major cities of Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, Brisbane, not Darwin yet, but the major capital cities were where people were living. The majority of the population lived in and around those cities. They were urban people. Ned Kelly out in the bush in northeastern Victoria, that's not how Australians lived anymore. And we have since then remained a highly urban people. So they were hearing these stories that are coming in from the bush, of this wild cattle stealing, horse stealing, police shootout, bank robbing outlaw. And it's a world that they don't understand or know. They don't go out there. You don't go out bush. There are bushrangers and snakes and things. You don't go out there. You go... Even Katoomba doesn't really exist in 1880. Not much. I think by 1880 I can't remember, the Carrington is late 19th century. I can't remember exactly when. I'll stick a date up. But even Katoomba is not really a holiday destination. People are living in Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong. They're living in Ballarat. As a major Victorian city or Victorian centre. They're living around Melbourne. They are not living out bush. So they're living in urban centres, even when they are in regional places. They're places like Wollongong or Newcastle or Ballarat or Geelong. They're not remote bush. The frontier wars are pretty much finished. So that is no longer part of what's happening in the country. The outlaws are pretty much finished at this point. The gold is not running in that direction into Melbourne in such volume that it's worth plaguing the gold shipments. There isn't this sort of world. It is a dying world. He is part of a dying world. And people are finding this absolutely fascinating. But there's something else that's happening in the 1880s. And it will happen in the 1880s. It will happen in the 1890s. Is Federation is coming. Federation is coming. In 1889, the father of Federation, Henry Parkes, father of the public education system, father of Federation. Henry Parkes will give his first address at Tenterfield of this idea of unifying the colonies into a country so that the colonies have more power and more economic clout to trade as a country instead of separate self-governing colonies. Because this isn't even, each of the colonies now has a parliament. South Australia has either just voted for or will soon vote for votes for women. These are very, very modern, forward-looking colonies. They're not looking backwards. This backwards is romantic. But also, Australians are starting to say, well, what makes us Australian and not British? What makes us Australian? And that's actually another point, is people did say British, not English, because the Australian population was very, very mixed. English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. Also Germans. Can't forget them. There's a reason why Adelaide's called Adelaide. There's a reason why there's a Leichhardt Street everywhere. Okay, that was Leichhardt and they got lost, but there is a reason why we have all these German names that pop up here, there, and everywhere. They were around. Now, the largest non-English speaking migrant group in the country at the time of Federation. So Australia is starting to become Australia. How do you become Australian? Well, we finally worked out how to paint gum trees. The Heidelberg School starts in the 1880s. Frederick McCubbin, with his absolutely gorgeous paintings of the Australian bush. Unbelievably beautiful paintings of Australian bush. Australian Expressionism, it's called the Heidelberg School. These are gorgeous paintings. They were giving a way for Australians to see themselves. And what did we look at when we wanted to see ourselves? We created a romantic notion of the bush. The Heidelberg School paints gorgeously. You look at some of those paintings and they capture the light and they capture the dryness and they capture the colours of the country. But it's a romantic idea of the country. It's a romanticised concept of the country. It's a romanticised concept of the bush. Also, you have Henry Lawson at around this time, in the next 20 years, writing his stories of the bush, of these hard-bitten men and these tough women who are out in the bush, who are farming, who are making the country prosperous. And these are being lapped up by people in urban areas. The stories of Ned Kelly are feeding into this same vein. These stories of this romantic bush outlaw who robs from the rich, who, when he robs banks, burns mortgaged documents, who captures whole towns and treats them at the pub. Stories that bear very little resemblance to the real person. Stories that make it sound as if, yeah, it'd be great to be held hostage by Ned Kelly. He's so polite, he's so this, he's a gentleman, he's a romantic figure, he's a Robin Hood figure. It would have been terrifying to have Ned Kelly hold you hostage. Absolutely terrifying. But once he's safely dead, once he's dead and buried, you have a character that you can build a myth off. You can build this romantic concept of the bush. The Australian concept of the bush has always been a construct. It was a consciously created construct to give Australians who were contemplating federation an idea of themselves as a unified group that was distinct from Europe. Because what did these individual colonies have in common? Not a great deal. But if you can create an idea of it, an idea of what an Australian is, and get people to buy into that idea, you can actually create a country out of that. We don't have a war of independence. We don't have any of these things. We needed essentially a meme. And Ned Kelly provided a meme. He provided a meme that other people were also coding into. Henry Lawson is using the bush is a meme. The Heidelberg School, the bush is a meme. The other great meme that we use is the beach. I don't really relate to the beach. I live in the bush. But the beach is the other great big meme you will find. But we use the bush so much. The idea of the rugged bushman, the authentic Australian is in the outback. We use that still. That is still a potent image for conservative political class in Australia. Oh, the urban elites. Australia is nothing but urban elites for the most part. For most of its history, we have been the urban elites. but we've used the bush to create that self-identifying. Even if the majority of people, the closest they get to the bush is a long weekend and some R.M. Williams boots. If that's the closest you get to the bush, then all power to you, because that's the most people get to the bush. When I started reading Australian books, I actually rebelled against the bush so badly that I said I do not want to read books unless it is entirely paved and the characters are female. Why? Because the bush had been shoved down my throat saying, identify with this, identify with this, identify with this, identify with these men, for so long that I found it deeply alienating. That is how strong that is, and how pervasive that imagery is in Australia. It's not accurate. It is most definitely the image that we send overseas. The Crocodile Dundee, what's his name? Steve Irwin, what was he called? Croc Hunter or something? I can't even remember. It's such a phony construct. Sorry, Steve Irwin fans, but there you go. All of that comes from this period, this 1880s, 1890s defining period of creating an Australian identity, and it is into that Ned Kelly fits. So, there you go. November 11th, Ned Kelly was hanged, and Ned Kelly, the idea, stepped into Australian consciousness and became an icon. An icon that was allowed to exist. The real man who was any actual threat to authority or to civil peace, he was safely dead by judicial execution. He was not a danger. But the idea of him was very, very useful. Also, one thing that did come out of Ned Kelly's execution was a royal commission into the conduct of the police, which they did not come out of squeaky clean, but it did put an end to the active persecution of police, of individuals in that particular area in order to keep the peace. It did, and by no longer actively persecuting the suspected cattle rustlers, or cattle thieves, cattle rustlers is so American, cattle thieves, that also dropped, and basically they came to a peace. But nobody comes out of the Kelly story squeaky clean. But once he was safely dead, once his armour is in the state institutions in Victoria, then he can be talked about, paraded, filmed, sung, written, painted, and appear at the Olympics as dozens of Ned Kellys at the opening ceremony in Sydney, Nolan Guys, with fireworks shooting shotguns. I had a friend who was one of them back in 2000. But that's how big Ned Kelly was. We had an opening ceremony that included Ned Kelly, Hills Hoists, and Victor lawnmowers. A little bit worried about that, but the only thing they didn't have was Vegemite. Only thing they didn't have was Vegemite. And then they had the Seekers on a flatbed truck at the end, seeing the carnival was over, which was in the games. But that's Ned Kelly. I hope I've given you something to have an idea about why Ned Kelly is so potent an image in my country, why this outlaw and not any of the others is so heralded. I think it is timing. I really do think it's It's the armour, it's the promulgation of the legend, and it's the timing. The timing, the last one, and the emergence of Australia as a nation at that time, I think is very, very important for why Ned Kelly is Ned Kelly. So, anyway, that's it for me. This was a long video, and I will see you again later with another adventure in Australian literature. Bye-bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.